I thought I was returning early to save the Christmas gala, but instead, I walked into the destruction of my marriage. The house was unnervingly quiet. Upstairs, my husband stood behind a trembling girl in a red gown, his fingers lingering on her zipper. When he saw me, he turned ghost white. I did not know then that behind that zipper lay a conspiracy worth millions of dollars, one designed to silence me forever. My name is Victoria Lane, but everyone in Charlotte knows me as Tori, the 33-year-old event manager for the Bright Nest Arts Foundation. I was a woman who prided herself on details. I could organize a charity ball for 500 people without breaking a sweat, ensuring every napkin fold was crisp and every champagne flute sparkled under the lights. I was the smart, middle-class girl who had somehow landed Graham Calloway, the city's most eligible real estate tycoon. Tonight was supposed to be the crown jewel of my career, the annual Christmas charity gala at the Magnolia Crest Club. My husband was the title sponsor, of course. That was how it worked in our world. I did the legwork, sweating in my black blazer, while Graham wrote the checks and smiled for the cameras, embodying the benevolent billionaire savior. The ballroom was buzzing with the low hum of expensive conversation and clinking crystal when disaster struck. My assistant, a sweet girl named Sarah, grabbed my arm, her face white. "Tori, the main projection system is glitching," she whispered frantically. "The audio files for the donor tribute are corrupted. Do we have a backup?" "I have the master hard drive at home," I said, checking my watch. It was only 9:00. I can be back in 40 minutes. Hold the fort. I slipped out the side exit, leaving the glitter and noise behind. As I drove my SUV through the winding, tree-lined streets of Charlotte, I felt a familiar swell of pride. I thought about Graham standing on the stage earlier, his hand resting possessively on the small of my back as photographers snapped away. He was perfect. He was always perfect. Just 10 minutes ago, he had sent me a text message saying he was stuck in the VIP lounge entertaining some potential investors from New York. I remembered smiling at the screen, grateful for a husband who worked as hard as I did. When I turned into the driveway of our estate in Callaway Ridge, my heart skipped a beat. The garage door was closed, but through the frosted glass panels, I could see the distinct silhouette of Graham's black sedan. That was strange. He was supposed to be at the club. I parked and let myself in through the side door. The house was enormous, a testament to Graham's wealth, but tonight it felt like a tomb. The air was thick and still. The Christmas tree in the foyer was lit, casting long, eerie shadows against the marble floor, and soft jazz was playing from the smart speakers, but the volume was set so low it was barely a whisper. It felt like someone had just turned it down in a hurry. "Graham," I called out, but my voice died in my throat. I heard a soft thud from upstairs. It sounded like a foot hitting the floorboards. I told myself it was just the housekeeper, or maybe Graham had forgotten something important and rushed home. I walked up the grand staircase, my hand gripping the banister tighter with every step. The door to our master bedroom was ajar. I pushed it open. Time seemed to freeze. The scene before me burned itself into my retinas instantly. Graham was standing by the vanity, his back slightly turned to me. Standing directly in front of him was a young woman I did not recognize immediately. She was wearing a crimson evening gown that looked like liquid fire. Graham's hands were on her back. He was pulling the zipper up, his fingers lingering on the fabric, his face leaning in close to her neck. Their breath seemed to mingle in the space between them. "Graham," I whispered. He spun around. The blood drained from his face so fast it was terrifying. He turned pale, a sickly, ghostly white that contrasted sharply with his dark suit. The girl gasped and clutched the front of her dress, stumbling back. "Tori?" "Wait," Graham stammered, his eyes wide with panic. It's not what it looks like." I stood there, paralyzed. It felt like someone had swung a sledgehammer into my chest. My lungs refused to draw air. The room spun. Graham took a step toward me, his face shifting from shock to a terrifyingly calm mask of control. He closed the distance between us, blocking my view of the girl, who was now trembling by the bed. I was helping her, Graham said, his voice dropping to that smooth, reasonable baritone I knew so well. She's the new PR consultant for the fund. Her zipper got stuck. She was panicking. I was just being a gentleman. Tori. I looked at him, at the sweat beading on his forehead, and then at the girl cowering behind him. A gentleman, I choked out, my voice shaking. You're helping her get dressed in our bedroom while you told me you were with investors. You're being hysterical, Graham said, his eyes narrowing. Don't start this. Don't do this right now. You know how you get when you're tired. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the room apart. But his words hit me like a physical blow, grounding me in a sickening sense of déjà vu. I had believed him so many times before, but as I looked at his pale face and the girl's flushed skin, I knew that this time, the lie was too big to swallow. The girl stepped out from behind my husband, wringing her hands together as if trying to wash away the invisible stain of the situation. She looked impossibly young, perhaps 22 or 23, with terrified doe eyes that darted between Graham and me. I'm Ava, she stammered, her voice barely audible. Ava Brooks. I was hired as the stylist for the gala. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. My gaze dropped from her fearful face to the hollow of her throat. My breath hitched. Resting against her collarbone was a delicate platinum chain holding a teardrop diamond. It was unmistakable. It was the exact necklace Graham had given me for our 5th anniversary just last year. Is that... I pointed a shaking finger at her neck. Is that my necklace? You gave her my necklace? Graham stepped smoothly between us, cutting off my line of sight. He did not look guilty anymore. He looked annoyed, like a CEO dealing with a tedious subordinate. Don't be ridiculous. Tori, he said, his voice terrifyingly steady. It's a loaner piece for the event photo shoot. Ava spilled champagne on her dress earlier. I brought her here to clean up and change so she wouldn't embarrass the foundation with a stain. I was just being a gentleman. He adjusted his cufflinks, looking down at me with a mixture of pity and disdain. The real question is why you abandoned your post, he continued, flipping the script so fast I almost lost my balance. You walked out in the middle of the most important night of the year. That is incredibly irresponsible. Even for you. I came back for the hard drive to save the audio. I argued, though my voice sounded thin and weak in the cavernous room. But you lied to me. You said you were with investors. Graham took a step closer, looming over me. He lowered his voice to a sharp, cold whisper that made the hair on my arms stand up. Look around you, Victoria. This house, that car in the driveway, the black card in your purse. Every single thing you have is because of me, because I work to maintain this lifestyle. He sighed, a sound of exaggerated exhaustion. We talked about this when you first moved to Charlotte. Remember what Dr. Evans said? You have a tendency to spiral, to invent crises because you feel insecure. You are doing it again. I am not imagining this, I cried, tears hot and stinging in my eyes. What about the late nights? Graham, the texts you hide. And now I find you half undressed with a girl wearing my jewelry. You are paranoid, he shouted, the sudden volume making me flinch. You are paranoid, and you are on the verge of destroying the perfect family image I have built for our investors. Do you have any idea how much is riding on tonight? I need to go, Ava whispered. She looked ready to faint. She was backing toward the door, clutching her purse to her chest. I didn't know. I didn't know his wife was home. Please, just let me go. She did not look like a homewrecker. She looked like a trapped animal. There was a fear in her eyes when she looked at Graham that mirrored my own. And for a second, I realized this situation was twisted in a way I could not yet understand. Graham ignored her plea and grabbed my upper arm, his grip bruising. "You are going to fix your face," he hissed into my ear. "And we are going back to the club. If you disappear now, people will talk. Rumors will start. And if you make me look bad, Victoria, you will regret it. Do not make this worse for yourself." I felt small. I felt shattered. But the habit of obedience, the years of being told I was the fragile one, kicked in. I wiped my eyes. I let him lead me out of the house like a prisoner. An hour later, I stood in the shadows of the ballroom wing, watching my husband on stage. He held the microphone with practiced ease, his smile dazzling the room. "Family," Graham said, his voice thick with emotion, "is the greatest gift of the Christmas season. It is the anchor that holds us steady." The applause was thunderous. I stood there, nausea rolling in my stomach, the image of his hands on Ava's zipper playing on a loop in my mind. On the drive home after the gala, I was the one behind the wheel of my SUV. I was crying so hard I could barely see the road. I swerved near the exit, my tires screeching as I narrowly missed a decorative stone pillar. I slammed on the brakes, hyperventilating. I looked up to see the old security guard at the Magnolia Crest gate watching me. He didn't wave. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just looked at me with a heavy, sad resignation, as if he had seen women leave the club crying over Graham Calloway a dozen times before. When I finally walked back into our living room, the Christmas lights were still blinking in their cheerful, rhythmic pattern. I looked at the stockings hung by the chimney, the perfectly wrapped gifts, the portraits of us smiling on the mantel. It was a beautiful set, a perfect stage. And as I stood there in the silence, I realized with a chilling clarity that I was the only actor in this production who hadn't been given the real script. In the days that followed the gala, Graham did something that terrified me more than his anger. He became sweet. He filled the foyer with white hydrangeas, my favorite, and insisted on taking me to dinner at our usual spot uptown. He even suggested marriage counseling, holding my hand across the table with a look of practiced concern. It was a performance, and I knew it, yet a small, desperate part of me wanted to believe we could be fixed. But the other shoe dropped 3 days later. "I need you to sign a few things for the accountant," Graham said casually one evening, sliding a stack of documents across the kitchen island. "Just standard end-of-year tax structuring. Same as always." I reached for the pen, my hand hovering over the paper. For years, I had signed whatever he put in front of me, trusting his financial genius. But tonight, the image of the zipper flashed in my mind. I stopped. I flipped the page. Buried beneath a mundane tax declaration was a document titled Amendment to Premarital Agreement. I read the fine print, my blood turning to ice. This amendment drastically reduced my settlement in the event of a divorce and included a new clause regarding forfeiture of assets due to documented history of psychological instability. "Graham," I said, my voice barely steady. "What is this?" He didn't even look up from his phone. "What is what?" "This amendment. It says if we divorce, I get almost nothing if I have had a mental episode." "I never agreed to this." Graham laughed, a dry, dismissive sound. "You are reading too much into it. That is just an old draft the lawyers threw in the pile. Stop scrutinizing everything. Tori, you are being paranoid again." He snatched the papers away, but the damage was done. I realized then that I had likely signed away rights in previous years, buried in stacks of tax forms I was too trusting to read. Suspicion is a heavy thing to carry, but it makes you sharp. The next morning, Graham left his laptop open in the study. I had never snooped before. but I sat down and typed in the password I knew he used for everything. I opened his email. There was a thread with his lead counsel from a week ago. The subject line was Strategy Update. I clicked it. The lawyer had written, "We should wait until the acquisition of the waterfront property closes in the spring before filing. In the meantime, continue to document her erratic behavior. We need to proactively construct a narrative of her instability to secure the assets." I sat back, the leather chair creaking beneath me. This wasn't just an affair. The girl in the red dress was a symptom, not the disease. This was a calculated liquidation. I was not a wife to him. I was a depreciating asset he was planning to discard once he had secured his next big deal. Panic set in, sharp and suffocating. I needed allies. I called a divorce attorney a colleague had whispered about, a man named Robert Henderson. I met him in a sleek office downtown, hoping for a lifeline. It took 5 minutes for me to realize I had walked into a trap. "Mr. Calloway is a very powerful man in this city. Victoria," Henderson said, his smile tight and condescending. He tapped a file on his desk. "My advice if he offers you a settlement, take it. A court battle would be messy. We wouldn't want your private medical history to become public record. Would we?" He knew. He wasn't my lawyer. He was just another node in Graham's network. I left his office and walked out into the cold December rain. I felt small. The skyscrapers of Charlotte seemed to lean over me, casting long shadows that belonged to my husband. He owned the buildings, he owned the lawyers, and he seemingly owned the truth. I ducked into a small coffee shop to escape the downpour, my hands shaking so badly I could hardly hold my cup. I retreated to the restroom to splash water on my face. While I was in the stall, 2 women walked in, chatting loudly about a recent high-profile divorce. "She got destroyed," one woman said. "Well, she drew Judge Harold Mercer. You know how he is. If the husband has a golf membership at the club, the wife doesn't stand a chance. Mercer is practically on the Calloway payroll," the other replied, laughing. "I heard he spends more time at their holiday parties than in the courtroom." I froze. The name Harold Mercer hung in the air like toxic smoke. When I finally drove home, the rain had turned to a miserable drizzle. I checked the mailbox at the end of our long driveway. Buried between holiday catalogs was a thick, white envelope from the Mecklenburg County Court. I tore it open in the car. It was a notice for a mediation session regarding a petition for dissolution of marriage. The filing date was 2 weeks ago. He had filed it before the Christmas gala. Before the red dress? I looked at the bottom of the page, and my breath stopped. Presiding Judge Harold D. Mercer. I let the paper fall to my lap. I had thought I was fighting to save my marriage, or perhaps fighting to leave it with dignity. I was wrong. I had been drafted into a war that had started weeks ago, and my enemy had already captured the judge. Sleep was impossible that night. I lay in the guest bedroom, staring at the ceiling while the digital clock blinked 3 m. The court summons felt like a physical weight on my chest, pressing the air out of my lungs. I grabbed my phone, scrolling through names until my thumb hovered over one I hadn't touched in years, Naomi Price. We had been roommates in college, but while I chose the quiet path of nonprofit management, Naomi had become a shark. She was now an investigative journalist in New York and the host of a podcast about financial crimes that terrified Wall Street executives. She had a nose for corruption and a complete lack of fear when it came to powerful men. I pressed the FaceTime button. She answered on the 3rd ring, her face illuminated by the glow of a laptop screen in a dark apartment. She didn't say hello. She just looked at my swollen eyes and tear-stained cheeks. "Tori," she asked, her voice softer than I remembered. I tried to speak, but only a choked sob came out. "Naomi, I think I'm in trouble." I spent the next 20 minutes crying through the basics. The girl in the red dress, the amended prenup, Judge Mercer. Naomi didn't interrupt once. She just listened, her expression shifting from concern to a cold, hard focus. When I finally stopped to catch my breath, she leaned into the camera. "Tori, listen to me," she said, her voice steady. "You can settle. You can take whatever scraps he throws at you and disappear. But Graham Calloway isn't just cheating. He is dismantling you. So I need to ask you one question. Do you want to survive this, or do you want to fight back? Really, fight." Naomi was on a flight to Charlotte the next morning. We met Saturday night at a dive bar on the outskirts of the city, a place with sticky floors where nobody would recognize Mrs. Graham Calloway. I told her everything. I told her about the emails I found, the lawyer who pretended to help me, and the way Graham had forced me off my antidepressants last year because he said they made me look vacant at parties. "He flushed them," I whispered, gripping my drink. He said he missed the real me. But then he started telling everyone I was unstable. Naomi slammed her hand on the table, making me jump. "This isn't just a bad marriage, Tori. This is a setup," she said, her eyes blazing. "He is using financial abuse and medical coercion to invalidate your claim to the estate. And Mercer. That is the linchpin. If Mercer is in his pocket, Graham thinks he is untouchable." She pulled out her phone and sent a text. "You need a shark of your own. You need Selena Marquez. Monday morning." I walked into the law offices of Marquez and Hollis. It was nothing like the glass and steel fortress Graham's lawyers occupied. It was a converted brick townhouse on a side street, cluttered with boxes and smelling faintly of old paper and strong coffee. Selena Marquez was a woman who looked like she could stare down a hurricane. She didn't offer me tea or sympathy. She pointed to a chair and opened a fresh legal pad. Naomi gave me the headlines. "But I need the details," Selena said, her pen poised. "I want dates. I want exact dollar amounts. I want to know exactly when you signed that amendment and who was in the room." For the next hour, she grilled me. She didn't treat me like a victim. She treated me like a witness. It was the first time in months someone had spoken to me using the language of law and strategy rather than condescending pity. "Here is the reality," Selena said, leaning back in her chair. "We have to hit the foundation. We challenge the legality of the prenup based on coercion. We demand full asset transparency. And we go after the link between Graham, his shell companies, and Judge Mercer." She paused, looking me dead in the eye. "But hear me clearly. Victoria, if we do this, there is no going back. Graham will come at you with everything he has. He will try to break you. If you start this war, you cannot run away in the middle of the battle." The room was silent. I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. I thought about Graham's hand on my back, guiding me for the cameras. I thought about the fear in Ava's eyes, and I thought about the knife he had effectively put to my throat with that court filing. My fear didn't vanish, but it hardened into something cold and sharp. It felt like a weapon. "Where do I sign?" I asked. Selena slid the retainer agreement across the desk. As I wrote my name, the jagged, messy signature of a woman who was done crying, I felt the shift. I wasn't just Victoria Lane, the perfect wife, anymore. I was the plaintiff, and I was coming for him. The mediation room at the Mecklenburg County Family Court smelled of industrial lemon polish and expensive cologne. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that felt designed to freeze the fight out of anyone who entered. I sat on one side of a long, gleaming mahogany table that felt less like furniture and more like a boundary line in a class war. On my side, there was just Selena and her young paralegal, their binders looking thin and pitiful. On the other side sat Graham, flanked by 3 attorneys in bespoke suits that probably cost more than my first car. Graham looked immaculate. He didn't look at me. He looked at his phone, scrolling through emails with a bored detachment that made my stomach churn. His lead counsel, a man with silver hair and a shark's smile, slid a single sheet of paper across the polished wood. "Mr. Calloway is prepared to be generous," the lawyer said, his voice smooth as oil. "He is offering a one-time lump sum payment of $500,000. In exchange, Mrs. Callaway waives all claims to Callaway Ridge Capital shares and agrees to a strict non-disclosure agreement regarding the marriage. He paused, letting the silence stretch. Furthermore, if she accepts this today, Mr. Callaway will graciously decline to petition the court for a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation. My hands clenched under the table. It was a bribe wrapped in a threat. Selina didn't blink. She pushed the paper back with one finger. "This is insulting," Selina said, her voice hard. "We demand a full schedule of assets. We are challenging the validity of the prenuptial amendment signed last November. My client was under the influence of heavy sedatives prescribed by a doctor on Mr. Callaway's payroll, and she was coerced into signing without independent counsel." The opposing lawyers chuckled softly, a dry, synchronized sound that made my skin crawl. "Allegations are not facts. Ms. Marquez," Graham's lawyer said. The door opened, and Judge Harold Mercer walked in for the preliminary conference. He was a small man with a grandfatherly face that masked eyes as cold as flint. He sat at the head of the table, not bothering with a gavel. He looked at Graham and gave a barely perceptible nod. "Let's keep this civilized," Mercer said. Selina leaned forward. "Your Honor, we believe there is a significant conflict of interest regarding the undisclosed financial ties between Ms. Marquez." Mercer snapped, his grandfatherly mask slipping instantly. "You will not use my courtroom to air conspiracy theories. Stick to the motion at hand." He turned his gaze to me. It felt like being examined by a disappointed school principal. "Mrs. Callaway," Mercer said, his voice dropping to a patronizing tone. "Divorce is ugly. It is expensive. And frankly, with your history, a public trial could be very damaging to your reputation. My advice: take the deal. Go home. Enjoy the holidays without this cloud hanging over you. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." It sounded like advice, but I heard the steel trap snapping shut behind the words. Selina tried to argue for a forensic accounting of Graham's holdings, requesting a 6-month discovery period. Mercer waved his hand dismissively. "Denied," he said flatly. "I will grant a 30-day window for basic disclosures. We are not going on a fishing expedition into a reputable businessman's affairs based on a disgruntled wife's suspicions." The session ended 20 minutes later. We had been crushed. I walked out into the hallway, my legs feeling like jelly. I leaned against the wall, trying to breathe. When I sensed him before I saw him, Graham stepped into my personal space, close enough that I could smell his familiar sandalwood aftershave. "You look tired, Tori," he whispered, his voice feigning concern. "You're shaking. Is it happening again?" The panic, I tried to step back, but I was cornered. "I can still make this go away," he said softly, leaning down to my ear. "Just sign the papers. If you force me to drag this out, I will have to release the medical records. The details about the nights you couldn't stop crying. The pills. The breakdown. Do you really want the whole city to know how broken you are?" He patted my shoulder, a gesture of ownership, and walked away, his entourage trailing behind him like a pack of wolves. That night, the panic attack hit me like a tidal wave. I sat on the floor of my bathroom, gasping for air, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My hands were trembling so violently I couldn't hold a glass of water. I hated myself in that moment. I hated that my body was betraying me, providing the very evidence Graham needed to paint me as unstable. I ended up calling a crisis hotline at 2 a.m, just to hear a stranger's voice tell me I wasn't crazy. The next morning, the sun rose gray and bleak. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was Naomi. "I have news," she said, and her voice was tight with adrenaline. "The good news is that we found a crack in the wall. The bad news is that the crack is right on top of Judge Mercer's head." Naomi went back to New York, but she did not leave the fight. She turned her apartment into a war room. While I was in Charlotte trying to keep my hands from shaking, Naomi was dissecting Judge Harold Mercer's life with the precision of a surgeon. She called in favors from old contacts at financial journals and spent nights trawling through public property records. 2 days later, she called me. "I found the ghost in the machine," Naomi said, her voice crackling with exhaustion and triumph. "It is a limited liability company called Hemingway Oaks Consulting. It is registered in Delaware to an address that is just a P.O. box. But here is the kicker. It lists Mercer's brother-in-law as the registered agent." "And what does Hemingway Oaks do?" I asked. "On paper?" "Nothing," Naomi replied. But looking at the transaction records, it receives hefty consulting fees from various real estate developers right around the time they have family court cases. And guess who paid them $50,000 last month? A subsidiary called CRC Holdings, Callaway Ridge Capital. I breathed out. The connection was real. "It gets worse," she continued. "I got a tip from a clerk who used to work in Mercer's chambers. She told me to cross-reference Mercer's golf trips to Florida with his rulings. I checked the dates. Every time Mercer flies down to Palm Beach on a private jet owned by a developer, a wealthy wife in Charlotte loses custody or gets a terrible settlement a week later. It is a pattern. Tori. A pay-to-play scheme wrapped in legal robes. I forwarded everything to Selena. We sat in her office, staring at the flowcharts Naomi had created. It was explosive. "We should give this to the Times," I said, feeling a surge of righteous anger. "Destroy them both." "Not yet," Selena cautioned, tapping her pen on the desk. "If we leak it now, they will claim it is a coincidence and bury the evidence. We need to use this to file a motion for judicial review. We need to force Mercer to panic. When powerful men panic, they make mistakes." Just as we were plotting our next legal move, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Please meet me. I have things you need to hear." Ava. My first instinct was to block the number. Why would I want to see the woman who helped destroy my life? But Selena stopped me. "Go," she said. "Graham thinks she is just a disposable accessory. That makes her the weak link." I met Ava at a coffee shop on the other side of town, far away from the country club crowd. She looked terrible. The glamorous girl in the red dress was gone, replaced by a young woman in a baggy sweatshirt with dark circles under her eyes. She refused to order anything. "He told me he was my mentor," Ava said, her voice trembling. "He found me on Instagram. He said he saw potential in my styling work. He introduced me to clients, got me the contract with the foundation. I thought he just believed in me." She looked up, eyes wet. "I didn't know he was using your contacts. Tori, I didn't know he was building me up just to use me." "Why are you here, Ava?" I asked quietly. "Because I'm scared," she whispered. "He called me last night. He was drunk. He told me to keep my mouth shut or I would never work in this town again." She pulled out her phone. "I have this." He didn't know he was recording. He pocket-dialed me a month ago when he was out drinking with some men. She pressed play. The audio was muffled, the sound of a busy steakhouse in the background, but Graham's voice was unmistakable. He was slurring slightly, arrogant and loud. "Don't worry about the wife. Mercer knows how the game is played. I sent the transfer to Hemingway Oaks yesterday. As long as the check clears, he understands what is expected. She won't get a dime more than I decide to give her." The recording ended. The silence at our table was heavy. "And there is this," Ava said, sliding the phone across the table to show me a text thread. It was dated the night of the gala, 2 hours after I had fled the house. "Graham. The stupid wife came home early. Ruined the mood. Don't worry. I will finalize the procedures as soon as the waterfront deal closes. She is just a technicality I have to deal with." I stared at the words. Technicality. Not a person. Not a partner of 7 years. Just a glitch in his spreadsheet. "I am so sorry," Ava sobbed, burying her face in her hands. I thought he loved me. I was so stupid." I looked at her, really looked at her, and the anger I expected to feel just wasn't there. Instead, I felt a cold, clarifying pity. Graham hadn't just betrayed me. He had preyed on her ambition and naivety just as he had preyed on my trust. He doesn't love anyone. Ava, I said, my voice steady. He just loves owning things. I took the phone and forwarded the recording to myself. I realized then that the enemy wasn't the girl crying into her napkins. The enemy was the system that men like Graham built, a system where women were interchangeable, disposable, and easily pitted against one another while the men drank scotch and bought judges. "You're going to help me," I told her, "and we are going to burn his little kingdom to the ground." Just as I thought I had secured a weapon with Ava's recording, Graham launched a counteroffensive that made me feel like the walls were closing in. It started with the emails. My phone pinged relentlessly with notifications from Graham. The subject lines were innocuous. Things like, "concern for your safety and regarding your episode." But the content was venomous. He had CC'd a Dr. Richard Evans, a psychiatrist I had never met, outlining my erratic behavior and suggesting I needed an urgent involuntary evaluation to ensure you are safe with yourself. Oh, he was creating a paper trail of insanity, and he was doing it in real time. Then came the humiliation. 2 days later, I was making tea in the kitchen when blue and red lights flashed against the window. I opened the door to find 2 uniformed police officers standing on my porch. "Ma'am, we received an anonymous call stating that there was an individual at this address threatening self-harm," the older officer said, his hand resting near his belt. "May we come in?" I stood there in my bathrobe, my face burning as I saw the neighbors peering through their blinds. I am fine," I stammered, fighting the urge to scream. "My husband, he is trying to scare me." "There is nothing wrong." They left after 10 minutes, but the damage was done. Graham was logging police interactions. He was building a file that said Victoria Lane was dangerous. The attack moved from my home to my sanctuary, at Bright Nest. I walked into a board meeting to find the atmosphere thick with tension. The chairman, a man who usually greeted me with a hug, would not meet my eyes. "Tori," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "Given the personal rumors circulating, and some concerns Graham has privately shared about your stability, we think it might be best if you took a sabbatical, just until things settle down. My career was the one thing I owned, the one thing that didn't have Calloway on the deed, and he was taking that too." "You can't do this," I said, my voice shaking. "I have run this gala for 5 years. I am perfectly Cap. I think we should listen to her." A sharp voice cut in. It was Lorraine, the owner of a small independent bookstore and the board's quietest member. She stood up, glaring at the chairman. "I saw Graham at the gala," Lorraine said firmly. "I saw the way he gripped her arm when he thought no one was looking. That wasn't concern. That was control. We are not going to fire a woman based on the whispers of a donor who thinks his checkbook buys him the right to ruin lives." The room fell silent. It was a small victory, but it bought me time. When I told Selena, she didn't panic. "Good," she said. "Record everything. Every fake welfare check. Every concerned email. He is overplaying his hand. He is arrogant. Tori. He thinks he is painting a picture of a crazy wife. But if we survive this, we can prove he is painting a picture of a stalker. Graham must have sensed I wasn't breaking fast enough. That night, my phone rang at midnight. "Stop this," Graham's voice came through the speaker, low and slurring. "Stop this circus with Naomi and that lawyer. If you don't, I still have the files from your therapy sessions 5 years ago. I will read them into the court record. I will let the press know exactly what pills you took and what you cried about. You wouldn't," I whispered, gripping the phone until my knuckles turned white. "Try me," he hissed. "I will burn your reputation to ash before I let you touch my money." I drove home the next evening in a daze, only to find the front door unlatched. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pushed it open slowly. The house was silent. Nothing was missing. The TV was still there. My laptop was on the counter. Then I saw it. On the coffee table, right in the center, lay our framed wedding portrait. It had been placed face up. A single, jagged slash had been carved across the glass, slicing directly through my face. It wasn't a robbery. It was a promise. I collapsed on the sofa, hyperventilating. The fear was a physical weight, crushing my chest. I couldn't do this. I couldn't fight a man who owned the police, the judges, and the keys to my house. I reached for my phone to call Selena and tell her to draft the settlement. I was ready to sign. I just wanted it to stop. Naomi arrived 20 minutes later. She didn't hug me. She walked over, looked at the slashed photo, and then sat down on the floor in front of me. I can't. I choked out, tears streaming down my face. He's everywhere. Naomi. He's going to destroy me. Naomi grabbed my hands, her grip fierce. If you sign that paper, she said, her voice hard and urgent, then everything he has done works. It becomes his playbook. If you run, he does this to the next girl, and the next. Is that what you want to be? The reason he gets better at hurting women? I looked at the Christmas lights still strung up on the banister, casting long, distorted shadows on the wall. I looked at the glass shards on the table. Something inside me snapped. The fear didn't leave, but it changed temperature. It went from a hot panic to a cold, deadly resolve. No, I whispered. I looked up at Naomi. I don't just want to escape him anymore. I want him to be afraid. I want him to feel every single thing he has used to terrorize me. The war had moved to 2 fronts. In Charlotte, Selena filed a formal motion requesting Judge Mercer's recusal based on a conflict of interest. It was a procedural grenade. We included the preliminary evidence linking Hemingway Oaks Consulting to the Callaway Ridge subsidiary. We knew Mercer would never step down voluntarily, but that was not the point. The point was to get the name Hemingway Oaks into the official court record. While Selena attacked from the front, Naomi was moving in the shadows. She flew back to New York and quietly transferred a digital dossier to an old contact of hers in the state attorney general's office. He was an ambitious assistant prosecutor she had worked with on a fraud case 3 years ago. He promised to look, Naomi told me over the phone. No guarantees, but if he sees the pattern, he won't be able to look away. And the pattern was impossible to miss. In a windowless room in Raleigh, investigators began overlaying Mercer's divorce rulings with the bank transfers into the shell company. They found 3 other high-profile cases in the last 2 years, where wealthy husbands had walked away with everything shortly after a golf trip to Florida and a deposit into the Hemingway Oaks account. The hearing on the motion to recuse took place on a Tuesday morning. The atmosphere in the courtroom was suffocating. Judge Mercer sat on his bench, his face flushed with a dangerous shade of red. He did not look like a grandfather anymore. He looked like a cornered animal baring its teeth. "Ms. Marquez," Mercer boomed, his voice echoing off the wood paneling. "This motion is an outrage. You are attacking the integrity of this court based on rumors and conjecture. I should hold you in contempt for wasting my time." Selena stood tall, her posture rigid. She did not flinch. "Your Honor, this is not conjecture," Selena said, her voice cutting through the tension like a razor. "We have bank records showing a transfer of $50,000 from a Callaway Ridge subsidiary to Hemingway Oaks Consulting, a company where your brother-in-law is the registered agent. We are simply asking for an explanation." Mercer slammed his hand down on the bench. "You are treading on very thin ice, counselor, if you say one more word about my family." "I am stating facts for the record, Your Honor," Selena interrupted, raising her voice just enough to be heard by the court reporter typing furiously in the corner. "On October 4th, a transfer was made. On October 10th, you ruled in favor of Mr. Callaway in the preliminary injunction. The timeline is relevant." I glanced at Graham. He was sitting at the defense table, And for the first time since this nightmare began, the mask had slipped completely. He wasn't looking at me with pity or disdain. He was staring at the back of Selena's head with pure, unadulterated fear. His jaw was clenched so hard I could see the muscle jumping. He knew that name. He knew that Hemingway Oaks was supposed to be a secret buried under layers of corporate paperwork. Mercer glared at Selena for a long, agonizing minute. He knew he couldn't throw her in jail without drawing massive attention to the very thing he wanted to hide. "I will take this motion under advisement," Mercer spat out. "We will reconvene in 3 days. Until then, I remain the presiding judge on this matter. Court is adjourned." He stormed out of the room, his black robes billowing behind him. He hadn't recused himself, but he hadn't dismissed the motion either. He was stalling. Graham stood up and practically ran out of the courtroom, his lawyers scrambling to keep up. He didn't even look at me. He was too busy pulling his phone out of his pocket, likely dialing the number for the shell company to find out how much we knew. 2 days later, I was sitting in my kitchen when Naomi called. "Tori," she said, and her voice was low and serious. "It is happening. The Attorney General's office just opened a formal, classified investigation into judicial misconduct involving Mercer and Hemingway Oaks. They are subpoenaing bank records tomorrow." I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for months. The air in the kitchen felt different. It was still cold, but the pressure had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't the only one being hunted. The wind was blowing hard, but it was finally hitting Graham in the back, pushing him toward a cliff he had built for me. Naomi called the project The Gavel and the Gold. It was a 3-part podcast series designed to blow the doors off the Charlotte family court system, and I was the star witness. I sat in a makeshift recording booth in Naomi's hotel room, recounting the details of the red dress, the gaslighting, and the shell company transfers. My voice would be distorted electronically to sound like a stranger, but the story was unmistakably mine. "We wait," Selena instructed us, her eyes glued to her laptop screen. "The Attorney General is executing the search warrant on the Hemingway Oaks office in Delaware at 6 in the morning. We drop the episode at 6:30. If we release it too early, Mercer shreds the files. If we time it right, he wakes up in a cage." The morning the first episode aired, the internet did not just react. It exploded. By 9:00, the hashtag #KnockerHemingwayOaks was trending locally. My phone started lighting up with notifications from Facebook and Twitter. People in Charlotte, women who had lost custody battles, wives who had been left penniless, were connecting the dots in real time. "My ex-husband hired them." One comment read, "Mercer gave him the house 3 weeks later." The dam had broken. I watched the news from the safety of Selena's office. A camera crew was parked on Judge Mercer's front lawn. The man who had once terrified me from his high bench stepped out onto his porch in a bathrobe to retrieve the newspaper. When the reporters shouted questions about his brother-in-law, Mercer froze. He tried to wave them away with a dismissive gesture, but the camera caught the tremor in his hand, the way his face seemed to sag into gray, terrified lines. He didn't look like a titan of justice anymore. He looked like a frightened old man caught in a lie. Then came Graham. He didn't appear on the news, but his panic was vibrating through my phone. He called me 7 times in an hour, then 10, then 20. I watched the screen flash, "husband," over and over, letting it ring until it went to voicemail. He left a string of messages that started angry and ended desperate. His investors were asking questions. The board at Callaway Ridge wanted to know why their subsidiary was being named in a corruption scandal. 2 days of silence was all he could take. He sent a text, "Meet me. Neutral ground. My office. No lawyers. I want to end this peacefully. I have a proposal that will set you up for life." "You should go," Selena said, sliding a small digital recorder into my purse. "I will be in the conference room next door monitoring everything. Let him talk. Let him think he is winning one last time." I walked into the Callaway Ridge boardroom at 4 in the afternoon. Graham was waiting at the head of the long glass table. He looked haggard, His tie was loosened, and there were dark circles under his eyes that no amount of money could hide. "Tori," he said, standing up and reaching out a hand I refused to take. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit." I sat at the opposite end of the table. "What do you want?" "Graham." He let out a sigh, trying to summon his old charm, but it fell flat. "This has gone too far," he said, pacing the room. "The investigation, the podcast. It's hurting the business. It's hurting us. I am prepared to offer you a settlement, $10 million. Cash, tax-free." He placed a folder on the table. "It is all in there," he continued, his voice picking up speed. "You sign a non-disclosure agreement. You recant the statements about my involvement with Mercer. You say you were confused, emotional. And the payments to Hemingway Oaks." I asked calmly. Graham stopped pacing. He leaned in, his eyes wide and frantic. "That was Mercer," he said, lowering his voice. "He pressured me. Tori. He said if I didn't pay the consulting fees, he would make the divorce difficult. I was a victim of extortion. I can testify to that. We can pin it all on him. He is old. He is finished anyway. But you and we can walk away clean. You get the money, I keep the company, and we forget this ever happened." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had slashed my photo, who had tried to have me committed to a mental institution, who had gaslighted me into believing I was crazy. He was willing to sell out his own partner in crime to save his skin. $10 million. I repeated slowly. "Yes," Graham said, looking hopeful. "Think of the life you could have. You could leave Charlotte, start over, be free." I reached into my purse. Graham smiled, thinking I was reaching for a pen. Instead, I pulled out my phone. It was already recording. I placed it face up on the glass table between us. "Did you really think," I said, my voice steady and cold, "that after everything you did to me, I was still stupid enough to be bought? Did you think I was scared of you?" Graham stared at the phone. The color drained from his face, leaving him that same sickly pale shade I had seen the night of the gala. You recorded this," he stammered. "Tori, I don't want your money, Graham," I said, standing up. "And I don't want your excuses. I want justice." I tapped the screen. "Stop recording." The silence in the room was deafening. It was the sound of a kingdom crumbling. "Selena and the Attorney General will be very interested to hear your confession about the bribery," I said, "and how you just tried to frame a federal judge for your own crimes." I turned and walked out the door. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what I was leaving behind. A man who had spent his life buying people, finally realizing that he had just sold himself out. Judge Harold Mercer was suspended pending an ethics investigation just 48 hours before our final hearing. The case was reassigned to Judge Elena Bradford, a woman with a reputation for being terrifyingly thorough and completely immune to the charms of the country club set. She came from a working-class family in Detroit, and everyone knew she had zero patience for men who thought their bank accounts put them above the law. I walked into the courthouse wearing a simple navy suit I had bought off the rack. It was the first time in years I wasn't wearing the designer armor Graham used to force me into. Outside, the reporters were swarming, but the headline had shifted. It was no longer about an unstable wife. It was about a real estate tycoon and a corrupt judge caught in a bribery scandal. Selena wasted no time dismantling the narrative Graham had spent months constructing. She didn't just defend me. She went on the offensive. She laid out my journals, the logs of the anonymous welfare checks, and the police reports. "Your Honor," Selena said, her voice echoing in the silent courtroom. "The defense will tell you Mrs. Calloway is unstable. We have proven that any instability was a direct result of a calculated campaign of psychological terror. Gaslighting, intimidation, weaponized medical history. This was not a marriage. It was a hostage situation." Then Ava took the stand. She looked terrified, but when she spoke, her voice was clear. She described how Graham recruited women who were young and financially precarious. She talked about the dinners where he would brag about his friends on the bench. He told me, Ava paused, taking a shaky breath. He told me not to worry about the legal side because he had people to take care of the paperwork. When she played the recording of Graham boasting about buying the judge, the courtroom went dead silent. Graham sat at the defense table, staring straight ahead, his knuckles white. Naomi was next. She was clinical and devastating. She didn't make accusations, she just projected a timeline onto the screen. She showed the transfer of $50,000 from Callaway Ridge to Hemingway Oaks, and then, right next to it, the date of a favorable ruling Mercer had given Graham in a previous land dispute. The numbers didn't lie. Graham's lawyers tried one last desperate move. They called Dr. Evans to the stand to reiterate his diagnosis of my fragile state. Selena stood up, holding a single piece of paper. "Dr. Evans," she asked sharply, "is it true that your entire evaluation of Mrs. Callaway consisted of a single 20-minute Zoom call scheduled by Mr. Callaway's legal team?" The doctor stuttered. The credibility of the defense evaporated in seconds. When Graham finally took the stand, he tried to play the role that had worked for him his entire life. He smoothed his tie and looked at Judge Bradford with a sad, practiced smile. "Your Honor," he began, his voice dripping with faux sincerity, "I am a disappointed husband. I love my wife, but her mental state has made it impossible to Mr. Callaway," Judge Bradford interrupted. Her voice was not loud, but it stopped him cold. "Spare me the speech. I want you to explain the email you sent to your counsel on November 12th regarding constructing a narrative. Explain why you were planning your divorce strategy before you even claimed your wife was sick. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, I saw beads of sweat break out on Graham's forehead. He opened his mouth, but for the first time, he had no script. The verdict came down late in the afternoon. Judge Bradford declared the prenuptial agreement void due to evidence of fraud and duress. She awarded me a significant portion of the marital assets, including a substantial block of shares in Callaway Ridge Capital, along with damages for emotional distress and legal fees. Furthermore, Judge Bradford said, looking over her glasses at Graham, "I am issuing a permanent restraining order against Mr. Callaway, and I am noting for the record that all evidence presented here today regarding Hemingway Oaks will be forwarded to the district attorney's office for the ongoing criminal investigation." She banged her gavel. It was the loudest, most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I walked out onto the courthouse steps and took a deep breath of the cold winter air. The reporters were shouting Graham's name, chasing after him as he tried to shield his face from the cameras. No one was looking at me. For years, I had been terrified of being invisible, but now I realized it was a gift. The monster was finally being seen for exactly what he was. That night, in a small apartment that was entirely mine, I opened my laptop. I logged into my new bank account and made my first transfer. It was to the Bright Nest Foundation to establish a legal defense fund for women trapped in financially abusive marriages. It was my final act of revenge. It was quiet. It was permanent. And it would ensure that the next time a man like Graham tried to destroy a woman, she would have a weapon waiting for her. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please leave a comment letting me know where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and hit the hype button so this story can reach even more people.